Welcome, welcome, welcome to the Unmasked Podcast. We're so excited you guys are joining us today. We kind of have a unique episode. If you've heard in the past, Diamond did a episode where she took my human design chart and we did like a little mini reading of it. For her, human design is one of the modalities that she uses with her business and her clients to help them take their life and their business to the next level. So it's always a fun thing. I've had mine looked at a couple of times by different people, but I always find it interesting when you do use tools like this, how people see things a little bit differently because of their own perceptions or just because they pick up on something totally different than somebody else might. So I found that really cool. And so take a second and go back and listen to that episode because she really talks about the centers and things like that, which I appreciate because I've never had that explanation. So now it makes a little bit more sense than what it did prior to that. So I appreciate that. But in this episode, we're going to kind of flip the channels here. And I'm going to do like a little mini reading on Diamond in her soul contract. So human design looks a lot of like personal things, traits, things that you might struggle, like I have an open throat, but then I sometimes get in too much in my head and I overthink it and I don't go with my, those type of nuances that I have. For soul contracts, we look at what our soul chose prior to reincarnating here for us to journey through. And so when I'm going to go ahead and pull up her chart here. And you guys, if you're on YouTube or anywhere else where you can see this, I hope that you can see this here. And then if you're on audio, I'm going to do my best to explain to you what we're seeing here. So Diamond, can you see that?
Yes, I can.
Okay, awesome. So there's a couple of personal things that come on this chart. So I'm going to kind of navigate around where you cannot see those personal things. But the soul, when it chooses to reincarnate, it decides with itself and all of the other entities that are working with it, kind of what the journey can be like, okay, for an individual, or maybe lessons that soul needs to learn. So depending on which reincarnation you're in, you could be an old soul, a young soul, a new soul. There's different things that you're journeying and you're learning from. So when we do this, we take the individual's birth name. So what is on your birth certificate, even if it is incorrect, misspelled, or not even what you think it is. So Diamond was like, what is she asking me this for? Because I always ask people a second time, please look at your birth certificate and make sure that it's spelled exactly the way it is on your birth certificate, because the letters in your name convert to a frequency of numbers for us. So this is gematria, it's Hebrew, numerology, and various tools that have been brought together in order to determine these frequencies. And it's all based upon your birth name, because the soul chooses that name prior to you entering here. And so if there's a mistake on your birth certificate, it's because the soul wanted a mistake. So, or I've had clients where their middle name is not what they thought their middle name was. It was a completely different middle name than what they've been used all their whole entire life, or there's a spelling that's wrong. And so it makes it, for us as practitioners, it makes a difference for us to make sure that we have the accurate frequencies. So we'll take those frequencies. And so like we all know Diamond's first name is Diamond. So as you can see at the very top, those numbers those letters turn into certain number frequencies for us to be able to determine what those frequencies are. So on a chart, you'll have the name, which is up here, which is completely blacked out for Diamond's privacy. And then we take those numbers and take the letters. I'm going to say that the entire time. I know that now. Letters convert to numbers. I do that every once in a while, but it's okay. So we'll change that, and then we put it on what we call a Star of David. So it's a Hebrew symbol, part of the Merkaba. So if you're into sacred geometry or anything like that, there's some significance behind that, which we can talk about that at a later date. But you're going to see two different triangles here. I'm going to scoot this up a tad bit. You're going to see two triangles. One's upside down and one's upright. And I find this interesting because human design uses diamonds and triangles a lot. So I think that's very beautiful that a lot of these tools use very same semblances. But on the physical part of it, you're going to see physical karma, physical talents, and physical goals. On the spiritual, you'll see the spiritual karma, talents, goals. And then ultimately, what all of us really want to know when we have a soul contract is what is our destiny here to do? And so you're going to see like these different numbers as well as different symbols. So on today's thing, I'm not going to talk about the symbols a lot. Some people who are very creative and artistic like to know what the symbols are. So if you're interested in that, just reach out to me and I could talk you through that. But we're going to just talk mainly about the numbers. So like here, we're going to start with physical karma. And the important thing to note when you're getting a contract reading is that I love this because Diamond is way younger than I am. So even though our birthdays are close, we're like 20 years apart, which I think is very profound for our listeners, because as practitioners of this tool, what we're starting to see is people are starting to move into the spiritual a lot faster than maybe somebody my age. So usually it's a 7-year cycle. So most people are 35 to 42-ish when they're finally hitting that spiritual part of their triangle. They stay in this physical aspect till then. But there is a lot of people like Diamond who are coming into their spiritual aspects of their life a lot sooner. So we're seeing them kind of play in this duality very beautifully, sometimes not so beautifully on their end, because it's very like a lot. But they really have figured out like the physical aspects, so they're able to step into the spiritual part of it a lot faster than maybe somebody my age who has a lot more conditioning to undo, or a lot more like what we would consider maybe midlife crisis in the past. That's more of this, we're shifting from the physical aspects of our contract to the spiritual aspects of it. And that's where we start seeing a lot of that conflict, because those conditionings and that rigidity are now coming to play. And that's problematic for individuals. Because they don't necessarily want to let go of that physical aspect because they haven't figured it out quite yet. So, and you see here like these numbers. So she has in a couple places where the numbers are the same. So that means the frequency of that part of her journey is her soul's chose a particular frequency, wants to stay there. Like you have to stay on that frequency to accomplish that or to use that. And those that are more like the 15-6, you kind of have a gamut of frequencies that you can kind of fluctuate in. And so sometimes for certain individuals, that is too much. And then for other people, it gives them a little bit more flexibility. And so for how we do readings is oftentimes we start out with questions, very much like in human design. You're looking at certain aspects, or you're looking at the most important thing. And so I'm just gonna ask the question that popped up with Diamond, because I know Diamond to some, pretty well at this point. We know each other's story and stuff like that. But so some of the questions that I might have asked, I already kind of somewhat know the answer, but this is one that I'm very curious of how you're going to answer it based upon something that you said in when you were doing the human design episode earlier. In the 15-6, it's all about, because the 15 is a very spiritual number and the 6 is a very kind of like barren to fruitful number. So in life, have you kind of like sometimes gone in circles, like chasing your own tail, trying to figure out life and figure out what you're supposed to do? And sometimes you just continue to go around in circles until you figure it out?
Yeah, it's felt that way sometimes.
Okay. So that's what this number here is for you. So there you go. No, I'm just kidding. But this number, that's what it is in the physical aspect. So it's probably more not necessarily with the spiritual stuff that you do. You probably have more definition with that, and we'll get to that in the spiritual karma. But you probably in earthly things or in more 3D-ish physical type things, sometimes it feels like you're just constantly going in a circle, and you're just you know where you want to get, but you can't just quite get there. Does that feel
Yeah,
normal?
the one thing that popped up was when I was in the business coaching program, like they were all niche for now, etc. And I had like niche down into like psychedelics and and like people who were using plant medicine to like help activate their superpowers. And then I thought I got scared and I was like, nah, that can't be my audience. I don't think my people are out there. So then I like picked a different niche. And then like a year later, I was like, oh, wow, look at me back where I said I was going to be when I first started this program. Oh, that's interesting.
All right. So that is a 15-6 number. And so when we talk about karma for our listeners, karma is not like in Western society, unfortunately, karma has kind of got this negative connotation to it. So we think like, oh, if we give good things, we'll get good things. If we get bad things, we'll get bad things back. And karma is more of an individual thing. It's your journey. So I always use the word lessons. When your soul chose this lesson, for you to kind of chase your tail at times with certain things, and you usually come back to the very first thing that you're doing. It's once you realize that that is something you're working through, and you realize that that's your default in a way, because that's the way you're conditioned to do, then you can recognize when you're doing it, and you can begin to go, wait a second, I have to trust my authority and do what I'm supposed to do in that authority. And so for Diamond here, this is something that she's probably very much aware of. And that's something that she's probably at times she's gotten very frustrated with it. And then at times she's like worked through it really, really easily. But that's what her soul was, one of the things that it chose specifically for her to do. Now, it gave her some talents in the 17-8 down here at the bottom in order to do that. And so our talents are how we transmute that lesson and bring it to fruition as like an actual goal. And so for the 17-8, it's all about speaking. That. Speaking and being grounded. So the 17 is a speaker number. Like you have several of those. But we'll just lay it there. So she has this ability when she's chasing her tail or kind of spiraling at times, trying to figure something out. Once she starts talking about it, and once she starts maybe, having somebody else in dialogue, or like this podcast, things start coming to her faster and better and quicker, and she does a lot less chasing. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah.
Awesome. And so this number is, I don't see it personally. I don't see this number very often because it's a very high frequency number. And so based on that frequency, sometimes it can be over, like for some energies, it's overwhelming. But when you do it correctly and you're grounded in it and it's done the right way, it's super powerful for you and for others because they'll often follow it. And that's where the 7-7 comes in. This 7-7 number, pretty much anywhere it's placed in the chart, is very magnetic. It's like a networking number. You're very good at creating communities and bringing people to you and magnetizing people to you. So knowing that you have like your plant medicine, that's what you're supposed to do. Once you vocalize that, you probably attracted people instantly to that program because it manifested out of who you are in the correct and grounded way. So that's kind of how like the physical aspects of the chart could work. And we can look at a bunch of other things with it too in a more extended reading. But I have a question for you with the, and I just lost my question.
Oh, no.
Oh, I know what the question was. Do you have like any extrasensory like abilities that are very prominent?
Nah,
Like
I was just
of any of the clairs?
I was reading a book about that. Nah, I mean, in human design, my strongest sense is feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't always trust that because I'm like, there's no reason for me to feel this way. So so I'm just gonna ignore it. I'm getting better, but yeah.
Well, because of the 17-8 frequency, and I'm more so talking about the 8. The 8 is a grounding number. And for you, when you ground into that feeling and that emotion, oftentimes things will accelerate faster for you and you'll have extra senses. So that's something in the physical, because you are so young, some of those things are still coming into play for you.
Yeah.
So that's something I would definitely pay attention to, is if you're extremely grounded in an idea or a thought or a relationship and you run with it, does your other senses kind of awaken because you're in alignment? So that might be something just to think about and practice and play with in the future to see if it happens. Because with that frequency, oftentimes some of those extrasensory, like clairaudience, clairvoyance, sentient, all those will come more into play for our listeners who don't know what the sentient things are. So that's the physical aspect of it. When we go more into the spiritual aspect of it, we're starting to get more into some of the abilities that you have. So this 10-1 oftentimes is a manifesting number, but it's also a number. Oh, how do I want to put this? It can be like, sometimes you believe your gut and sometimes you don't believe your gut. Sometimes you're like, and usually it's more of a God relationship, like a deity relationship. Like, yeah, I believe in God, but sometimes I don't necessarily believe in God. Like, I think he'll do this, but I'll do it myself because I trust myself more type number. And so sometimes when this pops up in the spiritual aspects, do you at times sometimes feel like at least when you first started, maybe your spiritual awakening, you're a little wishy-washy when it came to believing whether there really was a deity out there and what they could or could not do for you?
Yeah, when you say deity, I've started to equate that with divine timing. And I was literally just talking about this in the law of attraction meeting. Like, I was celebrating wins. I was like, this is happening and the book is launching and blah, blah, blah. And then I was like, but my challenge is patience, because because I'm like, outside looking in, things look good. But I'm like, I don't feel like I'm any closer to my goals. I feel like I gotta do something else. Like,
right. Well, and that's this number, because the 10 is more of like you're manifesting things that are happening, and then the 1 is kind of questioning whether you're on the right track, whether you're seeing those things come to fruition like you think. So a lot of this is like kind of letting go of the expectation, because when you're in that alignment and flow in the physical, like having a book get done, that's a physical thing, but it's also a spiritual thing. So you're kind of like, well, should I do this or should I do that? And that's totally what this number is really about, is you just owning that you are bringing things to light in the spiritual realm, and they will happen in their own divine timing, and it may not be Diamond's timing. And you have to trust that. That's so hard to do at times. So hard. But, as we've said, in the physical, in the spiritual, you have a talent that will just completely like help catalyst that to get you where you want to go. So when you're in those times of doubt, like the 4 is a number of oftentimes bearing to fruitfulness. It's when you get into that alignment and you feel in alignment and you're totally in flow, it'll work. But when you're not, it ain't gonna work. So 4 is completely a number of flow. And so when you step into that, the wishy-washy questioning stuff will still pop up at times. And that's the thing about the chart, is all of these things can happen simultaneously and they don't necessarily go away. There's still lessons for you to learn until you actually learn it. And when you do, then the soul will choose to reincarnate itself and maybe learn something different. So that's the objective here, is for you to really get in the flow of things and know that that flow is where you're supposed to be, even though it may not make sense in the physical aspects or in the expectational aspects of it, but you're using that to transmute that doubt and that worry, and should I do this, or I don't feel like I'm accomplishing my goals, but I'm getting there. And so that 4 will really help you do that. This is also a teacher number, a speaker number. That expression of that is how you bring it kind of into the earthly plane. So a lot of these things are happening to you, but they're also happening to others, and they don't know how to express them, and they don't know how to transmute them, but you're learning how to. And so using your voice and teaching those things, like teaching about human design and helping people learn about that in a way is helping you understand your questions about God and divine timing and all that, and helping you settle into that, learning that lesson. You have a lot of ability to control what's going on, just using your words, by expressing that and sharing that, and opening up to others. This is also, and I like this because I know you, but this is a duplication number. So it's you teaching other people to do what you do. Mm-hmm. And being in the same place that you are. So it's like duplicating yourself. It's making sure that you're expressing those things in alignment and projecting that out into the world, which you're pretty good at that. So, but I'm sure there's times of doubt. You're like, oh, should I do this or should I do that? Should I do this or should I do that? So that's where that lies for you. And that when you do that, it also transports you into that spiritual goal, which is the 13-4. And for the 13-4 number, it's a trusting flow again. No, it's got the 4 in there, so you're going to trust that flow. But the 13 is all about expansion and expression.
That makes sense.
So when you're questioning ideas, questioning is probably a good thing, because you got to figure out how to talk about it to get it to the goal, because that's where you need to be. That for some people, having that internal like dialogue or conflict is a good thing, because you can really push that out into doing what it's supposed to be manifested as in, a program or a relationship or divine timing of something that you're supposed to do. And that's the ultimate goal spiritually for you, is to express that number. The 13 is also a very feminine number. There's a lot of like softness in it, and very nurturing. It has a lot to do with water and wisdom and tapping into that. And so when you use that talent correctly and get into that flow, once you express those things, they're probably a lot easier for you to just do them. Things just come super easy to you, and you just like waltz right into a program or waltz right into a situation or a meeting, and it's like, oh, this is so easy, because it's completely in alignment with who you are. But that feminine side may feel a little bit unfamiliar to begin with, depending on how well we're tapped into our feminine and masculine energies. And most of us women are not very well tapped into our feminine energies. I'm just going to tell our audience that. And that's something like I've been really, really working on myself, is like, we are women and we are feminine, but their feminine energy is so different. And stepping into that is part of what you're here to do, and showing others how to do that in a more flow way, like getting them in flow and helping them do that. So water, does water resonate with you a lot? Is it an element that resonates with you?
No, as a Cancer, water doesn't resonate with me at all.
The reason I asked her that, audience, is because I'm a Cancer too. And water never resonated with me until I got older. And so now water is a constant, and I live in the desert, which that's completely okay, but water is something that I connect to. Like when I'm around lakes or whatever, I feel very much in flow, and oftentimes will find energy from that. But that's not an element that I started out with my sign actually being comfortable with. But in this spiritual space, water for you is a very significant thing. And so ultimately, everybody always wants to know like what their soul destiny is.
Of course, it's the biggest one. Like,
I
how
was
can you
totally
not?
not surprised when you talked about you have an open throat, whatever it's called in your human design, because that is part of your destiny is communication. So the 3 is all about communication, and the 12 is all about absorption and expansion. So taking everything that you're learning and communicating it out to the world. That's what you're here to do.
Makes sense.
Surprise, surprise, surprise.
All right. Yeah, no.
And I love it when I work with people and like they're in
Right.
the space of
I'm like, you're doing it.
and they're doing it. Like we think, oh, our soul destiny is going to come at the end of life type thing, you know, we're going to ascend, you know, all of that kind of jargon that sometimes we hear. And no, it's actually being in it and doing it, but knowing that all of this karma is going on around us. We've got to really like tap into our talents. We got to really make sure that these things are happening so that all of this is working together to create our soul destiny. Because I view our soul destiny as our life's work. That's what this journey is here to project us to do and for us to express out. And so for you, it's all about, you know, acts of love, acts of expression, acts of talking, acts of bringing people together and communicating that with them. It's all about you expanding into kind of that loving and wise figurehead in a way of being like the mentor and not the mentee. And as she ages, she's probably going to see that expression change, but become more and more significant because she's doing that. So, well, like one of the big things about the 13-4 is that feminine side, or the 12-3 is feminine energy. So tapping into that feminine energy as well and expressing that. It's also, like I said earlier, it's a teacher number, kind of a mentor number, a master number that uses a lot of expression. And so even if it doesn't work, it still is going to help somebody in the physical sense. So if we have programs or we say something and we look at it, oh, maybe I should have expressed that differently. Know that that's the space you're in at that time. And it is helping someone out there because that's what you're here to do. You're here to ultimately take everything you're learning and make that super simple for other people and allow them to come to you and interact with you and let them grow from that. And that's totally what your soul destiny is, which I'm completely not surprised by at all. You know, and so, you know, when we do charts like this, you know, there are some times where people have more, will ask more questions to understand how these numbers resonate and fit, and how they feel about them in a longer reading. But kind of for a short synopsis, that's kind of what, well, it's not kind of what, it is what Diamond's chart says. So, you know, that's where she is kind of like on a nutshell, you know, surface level of looking at the numbers and things like that. You know, people sometimes will come because they are starting a business and like, is the business idea that they're doing, is it going to be in line with their soul destiny? You know, is a relationship maybe that they're going to enter, which, you know, there's relationship charts that I can pull and do. We call those overlays with soul contracts. You know, we can look how people's dynamics going to be. We can look at how parents and their children's dynamics are. I can even do business name changes or create business names. So like there's all these things that we can do with these frequencies. We can even optimize somebody's name. So let's say there's some frequencies in your chart that you're really not comfortable with. You know, maybe, you know, I've had one that she wanted to do a certain type of work and she had a frequency that was really kind of dull for that. And so she had her name optimized, so it brought in a different frequency. And so there's multiple things that we can work with people in soul contracts. But for most people, it's they really want to know what their purpose is here and why they're here. what they're supposed to be doing, and if they are on that trajectory to do that, and maybe sometimes what the bumps in the road are. For me, like I have sevens in my karma, which is all about masking, which is totally poetic with our name of our podcast, because everything I have to work through is ripping off that mask. So when I want to hide, I have to rip the mask off. When I want to talk, I have to rip the mask off. So when you talked about human design and certain things not being open and certain things being closed, I was like, oh, that's my masking right there. Like that's exactly what that is. And so knowing that about ourselves, listeners, and knowing when those things happen, and you can go, okay, that's in my chart. I understand, but I know I have these gifts and these abilities and these talents to take that, learn the lesson that I'm supposed to learn, take that talent, figure out how to use that talent in order to make that karmic lesson that I have into a goal or my soul destiny. And that's ultimately what we're here to do, is to learn those lessons so that they can become goals and not just lessons, that we've actually learned them. So in a brief summary, that's what a soul contract is. So how does that resonate with you?
I love that so much. And I love that you talked about like, it's funny because when you reached out to me to do the podcast, her exact message said something along the lines of like, my higher self told me to reach out to you about this co-hosting this podcast. And for the sheer fact that I was awakened enough to be intrigued by the fact that she said her higher self showed her my face, I was like, yeah, sure, let's have a conversation. And when she told me about the concept of how we're going to be talking about the real and not like, for phrasing purposes, not the mask that we put on as business owners who are building these brands, I was like, well, that's on time. Cause because I had just I forget which one of my Gates gifts in human design it was, but like it was saying like you have to share from like while you're in the experience. You can't. And I remember that frustrating me because I was like, no, I don't want to share when it's not pretty. Like I don't want to I don't want to do that. I want to be here and then share the wisdom of what it took to get there. I don't want to be in the mess. And so to know, like to know that that is in fact like in the soul contract, it's in my human design. It's like, okay, well, right, I'm 29. I just turned 29 in July. So I'm like, well, it's better that I know it at this young, ripe age because I would have fought that my whole life.
Right. Well, and that's great to know that your expression comes from the mess. Like that's really what it is in essence, is your expression comes from the mess. And if you don't express it while you're in a mess, you miss the moment. You miss the teaching part of it or the lesson part of it. And Diamond brought up a very important thing, I believe. And I've been finding this more and more as I journey on this road of working with peoples from the more the soul aspect. As people begin to wake up, I'm not necessarily a big fan of that terminology, but they become more conscious. And we as a planet become more conscious of things. The more that we know where we're going, the better off we can serve other people. And I say that because I'm a person, like I can get in my head and get the logic going, and I miss opportunities. And if I would have known this stuff when I was 29 years old, life would have been a lot different for me. Not that life has not been good, but I would have probably saved myself a lot of heartache along the way. And so if you're a younger listener, reach out to us and use these tools to better yourself. I view them as an act of self-care. I'm big on self-care and self-healing. And I think this is these modalities and tools are some of the most acts of self-care and self-love you can give yourself, just having the knowledge. Because when you go, oh my gosh, I'm masking, and I do this all the time. I'm one of those people that have the conversations in my head. I guess not everybody does, but I do. And it's probably that whole clogged up sacral or crown. But when I have that conversation, I can quickly recognize now I'm masking, I'm hiding. I'm not in alignment. So what do I need to do to get in alignment? And when it used to take me months or even years to go, oh my gosh, I was completely out of alignment with that job or in that relationship. Now it's pretty quickly, usually within a matter of minutes, I'll do something. I'm like, oh dang, I just completely masked. I completely am hiding. And knowing yourself is the greatest act of love for yourself, in my opinion. So to our listeners, I hope you enjoyed this episode, and connect with us in the show notes, and make sure that you like, subscribe, and share this episode with those that you love, who may need some self-awareness on some of the things that they're going through, or even patterns. Both of these tools are great to see pattern recognition. If you have behaviors or habits or patterns or attract the wrong behaviors, patterns, then it might help you in order to see that and make life a lot more at ease for you. So thank you for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode.
Yeah.